There's a major update after what has obviously been a very difficult couple of months for Rupert Lowe. You'll recall the Met Police were investigating allegations of threats of violence towards Reform's chairman himself, Zia Youssef. All of this sort of began in March, you'll recall. Rupert Lowe did an interview with the Daily Mail on the 5th of March. A couple of days later, coincidentally or not, you may feel, Rupert Lowe was reported to the police for alleged threats. After this lengthy investigation, which dragged in Rupert and his staff to give statements and so on, there will be no charges against Rupert Lowe. The chief of the Crown Prosecution Crime Division, Malcolm McAfee, said after considering a number of witness statements, they've concluded that there is insufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect of conviction. He added, the CPS function is not to decide whether a person is guilty of a criminal offence, but to make a fair and independent and objective assessment about whether it's appropriate to present charges for a criminal court to consider. Based on careful consideration of this evidence, we've decided that our legal test for criminal prosecution has not been met. Now, just very, very briefly, the two stages to a criminal prosecution, the test for a prosecution. Firstly, there must be evidence, and secondly, it must be in the public interest. The Crown Prosecution Service have decided that on this occasion that the legal test for criminal prosecution has not been met. Rupert Lowe has always denied any wrongdoing, and Reform have always denied that it was linked to Rupert Lowe's criticism of Nigel Farage. Rupert Lowe, on the other hand, has published a lengthy statement addressing some of these issues, which I'll go through in just a moment. But you'll recall previously when he was under investigation by the Met Police, of course, I couldn't say too much, but all I would be able to say is that he had my support. And as it turns out, they've decided not to go any further with any of those charges. But Rupert Lowe says the following. The Met Police have today confirmed that they are dropping the investigation into the false allegations that he made threats against the Reform Party chairman. His full statement is as follows. Just checking that you can read that properly. Maybe if I move that, you can see it a little bit better. He says, this was not normal political infighting. It was a sinister attempt to weaponize the criminal justice system against me, putting not just my political future, but my liberty at risk. All because I dared to raise constructive criticisms of Nigel Farage, stood firm on deporting illegal migrants, and pushed for reform to be run democratically, not as a vehicle to stroke one man's ego. Now, just pausing for thought there for a moment, many people, particularly recently, as I've covered political and news topics, many people have asked me if I would ever go into politics. I'll never say never, but this is one reason that I haven't as yet been interested to go into politics, because of this kind of thing. I'm not drawing statements of fact here against Reform, but what I will say is it is my view that this is the sort of thing that happens in Parliament, and people do make these allegations against each other. There is this kind of infighting going on, and that is one reason that I'm not really interested. But nonetheless, let's read on. How did Reform respond, Rupert says, with a brutal smear campaign for the sin of asking legitimate questions about the party's direction, policies, and leadership? I was vilified and targeted. I am ashamed to have shared parliamentary platform with them, ashamed to have trusted them, ashamed to have called them friends. Farage is no leader, he says. He's a coward and a viper. I feel deeply embarrassed that I ever thought he was the man to lead. It's my view that the police process was weaponized to silence a party colleague who raised reasonable concerns. If Farage were ever to control the vast power of the British state, I believe he would not hesitate to do his adversaries what he'd tried to do to me. With real power, I fear he would wield that immense responsibility to crush dissent, as he has done time and again over the years. Smearing my innocent staff in a pathetic attempt to attack me was disgusting, alongside briefings to journalists from senior Reform figures suggesting I had dementia. I remember that. That was quite poor taste. Even if it were true, it's still poor taste. The lowest, vilest tactics I've seen in my 67 years. They are not fit to lead, Rupert says. They are not fit to be MPs. Please listen when I say this. For the good of our country, Nigel Farage must never be Prime Minister. To the millions of decent Reform supporters, you must do what you believe is right. I, personally, could not remain in an organisation led by such men. They do not deserve your support, your time, your energy, your money, or your vote. I urge you to do what you think is right. When the time comes, we will work together to advance a political movement that is credible, professional, decent, democratic, and honest. There will very soon be an alternative to the rotten leadership of Reform. And to those of you that have supported me during this incredibly difficult period, thank you. I've been touched by your messages of kindness. Without your support and without my social media platforms, I would have been buried by their smears. I truly mean it. Thank you, Rupert says. You'll be hearing a lot more from me very soon. And I suspect, this is me speaking now, not Rupert Lowe, but I suspect that there might be legal rumblings in the background. I suspect he may be talking to lawyers. If I were in that position, I would be doing the same because of course, the Metropolitan Police dropping this investigation with a statement from the CPS as well, having considered the evidence. Now, just to clarify, when I mentioned the legal test for prosecution, it's a two-part test. It's the Crown Prosecutor's test for a prosecution. It's a two-stage test. Firstly, there's an evidential test. Is there sufficient evidence that a properly directed jury may be able to reasonably convict on that charge? And the second test is it in the public interest? So sometimes, for example, let's take a random example of an elderly person doing something by mistake. They didn't realize, maybe they had some sort of learning difficulties or whatever the case might be. They did something wrong. The evidence suggests that there is an offence there, but they are really sorry for it. They didn't realize it was wrong. It was a strict liability thing or whatever the case might be. It may not be in the public interest to prosecute that old person when they are desperately sorry for it. They realise they've done wrong and they would never do it again. That sort of situation, the CPS then might say, well, the first part of the test is met. There is evidence that this crime's happened, but no one was hurt. There's no harm done. They realise it was wrong. They'll never do it again, and so on. They may decide that it's not in the public interest to prosecute someone in those scenarios. Obviously, I haven't specified any kind of offence there, but, you could make something up and you could find a scenario that you might think that'd be suitable. But as I mentioned before, the head of the Crown Prosecution Service Special Crime Division, Malcolm McAfee, was quoted to say as follows: after considering a number of witness statements, they've concluded that there is insufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect of prosecution. That would be the first part of the test. He went on to say that whilst it's not the CPS function to decide whether a person's guilty, but to make fair, independent, objective assessments about whether it's appropriate to present charges to a criminal court. Based on the careful consideration of the evidence, they've decided the legal test is not met. So, just to spell it out absolutely clearly, they do not believe, and this is what they do not believe that a properly directed jury would be able to convict based on any of the evidence that's been presented. But coming back to Rupert's statement for a moment, there is a little bit of a hint in here. He says there will very soon be an alternative to the leadership of reform. Who that might be, and if that really does happen, of course, we don't know. But what I can say is Labour does seem to be running terrified of reform, so much so that in my personal opinion alert here, I do think that Labour are trying to take little leaves out of the playbook of the Conservatives and Reform to try to appease voters, because again, in my view, I think they fear that they are losing voters, particularly with the devastation of the last local election, albeit it was a relatively small local election. I think that's an indication of things to come. So I think they are terrified of reform. I think reform's rise is incredible. It is a fantastic growth, and it does indicate what direction the great British public want this country to go in. But whether that's with a change of leadership or even a new party entirely, who knows? But we will see what happens. But what I do know is that there are a great many people that support Rupert Lowe and will continue to do so. I had a great chat with him here on this channel. I'll link that video below. Go and have a watch of it if you haven't seen that already. I think the interview was a great insight as to who he is, how he thinks, what he thinks about different things. So please do go and watch it and let me know what you think. So with that, I have to say I am pleased with the outcome because I did and I do support Rupert Lowe, and I think it's right that this investigation has been brought to an end, because I do think it was a great amount of stress both for him and for his staff. But to his credit and the credit of his team, they've continued to work hard and diligently throughout this whole process, which I assure you is a very difficult thing to do if you are under investigation by the police. So with that, let me know your thoughts and comments below. Please do like this video and subscribe. That's the only way my videos get shared by the platform. And to you, I'm grateful. Thank you for watching.